There are several different ways to shade. Vertical strokes would be up and down this way. So if I were going from light to dark, I'd go as light as I could over here, and I'd go as dark as I could over here. From a black to a very light light, I'd want to use my 4B pencils over here and my 4H pencil over here, right? And then maybe a 2H and a F and a 2B or something like that, so that I'm getting a really soft lead over here and a really dark mark. Hatching is a 45-degree angle moving this way, right? And then a cross hatching is a 45-degree angle moving this way with a 45-degree angle moving that way. This is how many of you were taught to shade in art class. But there's something called cross contour, which means that you're taking the contour of the object itself. So this brick right here, each plane on this brick moves in two directions. So I want to shade the side of this block. This block moves in this direction, up and down, and it also moves this way, off to vanishing point right, as I can tell by the light up and above. So I'm going to move my pencil when I shade that either off to the right or straight up and down. I'm going to get in. I want to get a softer pencil with a bigger lead to be doing my shading with. Makes it a little bit easier. But to move this in cross contour on this block, I want to move up and down all the time on here, and back and forth all the time across this way. When I get to the table, I'm going to move it horizontally flat because the table is a horizontal surface, and I want to depict that. So this is going to go horizontally flat. And then if I want to go off on a 45-degree through there, I may, just to even that out, line up with this line here and sort of go off that way. So I'm getting a cross hatching in there. So step one in drawing shadows is to divide the light from shade. So I'm going to come here on the circle and I'm going to say the earth, if I took a circle and went through the center of it, there'd be that straight line and this straight line. But as I move away from the equator, it would get rounder and rounder and rounder as it got to the top of the circle, and rounder and rounder and rounder as it got to the bottom of the circle, right? And same thing here. When I go in longitude, it'd get rounder and rounder as it went out. So these are the contour lines of the circle. This is a cross contour for this circle. So here in the middle, I'm going to move my pencil straight back and forth. And then as I get over here, I'm going to get rounder and rounder until I get out this way. Here I'm going to go straight this way, and then I'm going to get rounder and rounder until over here I'm coming around this way. The reason for this, as you can see, is if I draw a circle and then I go to shade it in this way, I'm basically flattening it out and I'm denying the perspective that I created by drawing the silhouette of it in a circle there. The other direction, so if I'm drawing around here, I'm drawing this way around this globe, and I'm also drawing this way around the globe, right? I've already started with this crescent shape here, so I want this to go around and around the circle this way to create a buildup of line that goes around that sphere. All that work you've done to draw a really nice sphere, if you do a hatching or a cross hatching on it, you're going to get a very flat, or you're going to be flattening out the sphere and denying the perspective that you created. Again, on the table, I would go flat horizontally. And then off to a 45° to the right, probably. Kind of doesn't matter. You could go straight up and down if you wanted to do a cross hatching on the table. But this works better for me because my hand kind of moves naturally in a 45° angle. And I'm turning my paper because I have more control down here at this edge. That's advantageous to me to go that way and this way on it. So this is the shadow of the circle. One contour of the cylinder is straight up and down, as we can see by this line that defines the outside edge of it. This other line that comes across here is the other contour, so to make a cross contour in there, I'm going to move my pencil back and forth this way, as if I were going around and around and around and around and around, which is going to round that out. I don't have to be too careful once I figure out what the contouring is. I can just move my pencil in a half smile across the right side of that cylinder. When shading the cone, I want to move from this point to this point, and from this point to this point, and then sort of fan out as I'm doing that in terms of my vertical contour. And then my horizontal contour is going to be in relationship to this line right here, the same half smile that I did with the cylinder. I'm only drawing in a light gray. So I'm doing light and shadow in gray here. I'm not going to my blackest black yet. Because step number 2 is to separate the shadow into gray and black. Okay? And my black is going to be for shadow core and cast, and my gray is going to be for reflected light. So I'm going to get to my darker values here. Cast shadow is where it hits the table. So here, right up against the block, I'm going to go very dark with my black, and I'm still moving my pencil in contour horizontally across the table. Shadow tends to get a little bit lighter as it moves away from the object. So maybe I want to transition from this light gray to a medium gray in between here and sort of lighten up on my darkness as it moves out towards this point. To cast a shadow out from the sphere, I come dark right up against it. This also helps me see the edge of that, even though it's in shadow, which is appropriate because my reflected light here is a number 3. So if we talked about shadow here, we had 3 gradations, right? Or we had 5 gradations. So here we have highlight, which is going to be paper white. We have light, which is going to be a very light gray. We have reflected light, which is going to be a darker gray. We have core shadow, and we have cast shadow. So our first step, number one, was to divide the light from the shadow. So this is all light, and this is all shadow, right? So now we're dividing our 3, 4, and 5, but we're not really worrying about the difference between core and cast. So we're making all of these black, and we're making this gray. Get a nice solid black up against the circle and let it get lighter as it moves off towards the outer edge. This is also a chance to sort of justify my lines here, make sure that the lines are changing if they're not quite right. Never just color something in without questioning if it's correct or not. Alright, so I've got cast shadow. The core is the line between the light and the dark. So it's actually darker here. And notice I'm moving in a cross contour again. It's darker here against that line where it moves from light to shadow than it is back here. So I would see reflected light. This is my number 2. My light is going to be in there. This is going to be my number 4, which is going to be core. Then I'm going to have 3 in here, which is my reflected. And then I'm going to have a 5 down here, which is cast. The line between reflected light and core is a soft transition. So if you think about it, when we go from light to core, here we're going from a 2 to a 4. So there's a hard line between them, so we see a strong, solid line there. Here, we're going from a 4 to a 3. That's not a huge transition. So we see a soft transition, and I'm just going to soften this edge here because it's sometimes hard to see the transition between light and reflected light. So I'm going to make it really hard here up against the line where it turns, and then I'm going to soften it gradually as it goes out towards here. The reason that I see this in the shadow is because I'm going here from a 3 to a 5. So again, I'm jumping over a 4. There's a harder transition here. And if I think of it as black, gray, and black, again, of course, I'm going here from gray to black. Here I'm going from gray, or from a lighter gray. In the cube, you're going to see that line here, since this is in light and this is in shadow. You're going to see that here. So your shadow core is basically going to run along the edges here where it turns light to shadow. Here usually we see this kind of a thing happening where the shadow kind of goes in this kind of a curve. And then again, I want to soften that a little bit so I get a more gradual transition towards this corner over here. So I have core, reflected, cast. Core, reflected, cast. This core is going to move here and here and do the same kind of thing it does on the square. It's going to round out there just a little bit. So get a nice hard black up against the edge, and then we work your way out from that into this softer reflected light. Sometimes I take my finger and I rub around to soften up those things. Then I take that really dirty finger. See how dirty my hands are getting? But this creates a really good opportunity because this now becomes a drawing tool. So if I take this and I rub it around in the graphite, then I come out here and I rub this down, then I've got a really light gray. So usually on the block, I show the light facing, or the top of the block facing up to the light, and the front of the block is where I do my light. So I have a difference between highlight and light. And here, I've smudged that light in. The highlight's going to go in a little circle over here, not touching the edge of the sphere. But so that there's gray all around it. With this, I'm going to have my highlight up here, and I'm going to put my light over here. And then there's going to be a streak of light, usually, right through here on a cylinder. So it goes light, highlight, light, core, reflected, cast. This needs a shadow core. So step 2 is dividing the shadow into grays and blacks. Step number 3, I would say, is looking for a soft transition between the gray and the black, right? And a hard transition between the light and the dark. And then step 4 would be to put in some light. And then step 5 would be to erase out a highlight. In the cone, the highlight is going to move like this to the point. So the highlights, if you notice here, here, and here, don't actually touch the edges of the object. At the end of your drawing, we're going to add one more step here. That's going to be to unify it and make sure that nothing in the shadow is as light as anything in the light. That means you need to take your reflected light and make sure that it's darker than your light. So here I have a light gray and here I have a darker gray. You don't want any paper white to come out over here in the shadow. So if you go too dark with one of these, let's say you come over here and you shade this all in and you can't see a reflected light in here, then take your kneaded eraser and tap or drag it in here a little bit so that you get back to something that's light, and then smooth your transition again and just go back and forth with it until you get something that shows a smooth transition with a hard edge here and a soft edge here and a hard edge here. Get it back to where you want it, and then make sure that this area here hasn't come back up to the white. You know, if you erase it out with your eraser here, you're going to get back up to paper white, and that's going to be a really shocking white down in there. That wouldn't be the way that we would see this. It would have to be lower on the value scale so that we see that a little bit darker than we do the light.